Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, members of the council, I'd like to amend the agenda to add on legislation 0131-14. It's an emergency legislation to approve the settlement agreement between the Navajo Nation and the United States, and authorizing the President, the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, and the Attorneys of Record to execute the settlement agreement. I do have a copy, and I think it's being distributed. So I would make that motion. And as I stated earlier, I reserve my time on everything. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Second by Honorable Danny Simpson. Discussion on...
And make it, and make it the first item of discussion as number one. So I think it's non-controversial. This is something that we need to do. And
Let's get it on the agenda first. Okay, a motion by Mr. Leonard Sosi for Amendment 3, second by Honorable Danny Simpson. Any discussion on Amendment 3? Mr. Buzzards, for those that want to speak. Mr. Navigate.
Mr. Pro Tem Chair, and again, my fellow colleagues that are here on the floor, I'd like to ask our legal counsel and also the DOJ that they would provide us the information that justifies this effort to be an emergency situation here. As viewing this document here, there is not a situation where the nation is, and also its ability, that is not being threatened by any nature. But that is something that I would like to have it clarified before an action be taken on this matter here, because I think that the important thing is to allow this council to be a little more transparent. And of course, that is some of the foundations and the fundamental that we have been progressing as a council and doing the business of the people here. As this requires a 5-day period to allow people to take a position and have a little understanding of what the council is moving on here. So in that fashion, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask that the legal question to our legal counsels. Mr. Pro Tem Chair.
Question of privilege by Mr. Honorable Gate to respond first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, members of the council. Mr. Begay, in response to your question about emergency legislation and what constitutes emergency, there are two things that we can refer to, and one is, as you had indicated in your question, that there is a provision under Title II, 164, Section 17 or 16. The essential part of that particular section talks about what constitutes an emergency, and the relevant part would be matters which directly threaten the sovereignty of the Navajo Nation. Such an emergency matter may arise due to the pressing public need for such a resolution and must be a matter requiring final action of the council. That's the criteria for the definition under the law. The second thing that I'd also like to point out is that the Navajo Nation Supreme Court has addressed this particular issue in a case that everyone knows so well between the branches in Shirley v. Morgan in talking about what is emergency legislation. In that particular instance, the Navajo Supreme Court had talked about emergency legislation and saying that emergency procedures are specifically exempt from emergency legislation. The court went on to say that there needs to be, or in that particular case, there was no indication that the council made any effort to establish a public record showing the existence of a genuine emergency threat to our Navajo Nation sovereignty. In essence, what the court is saying is that for emergency legislation, the council needs to make a record to show that there was a genuine emergency threat to Navajo Nation sovereignty. So, in this particular instance, the code does allow for emergency legislation. The court does say that public record needs to be established, creating that emergency. And so in this particular instance, it may come down to, at the time when the legislation comes up, that question or those matters be answered in that fashion, and whether or not record will show that it is emergency legislation. And so I think it may have to wait until it gets to when that matter comes up on the agenda. And that's my reading of both the law and what the Navajo Supreme Court has said. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Department of Justice.
Thank you. Legislative Council and I've talked about this prior, and I am in support of the explanation that he provided to you that the Supreme Court did indeed determine that you do have a procedure or a process in place that would allow you to consider emergency legislation. What the Supreme Court has required is that you establish a record as to why it is an emergency. That is laid out in your findings as to why this is put forth to you as an emergency. Whether or not it is an emergency is a subjective determination that council will need to make, and I do agree that it seems the appropriate time to make that is during debate of the legislation. Mr. Speaker.
Okay, get your time. Okay.
Mr. Potent Chair, I don't know my colleagues. There is a legislation that is being prepared and that will be presented to us, and that calls for a proper protocol in a way of receiving the grants from and also the awards from the outside of the nation here. And so I think it's appropriate to allow this thing to take its path and accordingly. And in this fashion, I don't believe it's a proper matter. And so, I'm planning I seek your support in a way to not to make this effort and make a hasty a decision on this issue. This is a very important matter that to the nation and also to the future of it. And I think we need to stand on the principle that what has been accommodated to the council here and through our legal counsel, and I think that's a responsible action, and with their guidance at the path of not allowing this to take place, but allowing the right legislation to come forth and to act on that in that fashion here. Mr. Pro Tem Chair, that's what I have, and I'll reserve my time.
Curley.
Do I have 5 minutes?
You have 5 minutes.
I want to take more than 5 minutes. I want to filibuster. I have all night. Do we have a filibuster rule? Actually, I sticking on the way over the paper, Navajo paper headline read, somebody made a comment, I don't know who did, that said, I will not waive Navajo sovereignty. And I was thinking about if that person understood what Navajo sovereignty meant in using it in that context. In our context, sometimes, we talk about waiving sovereignty in relations to being sued. Then we waive our sovereignty. That's the old English concept, English law concept, where the king, you can't sue the king. And that concept is carried across the ocean to the United States government. And somehow it trickled down here to the Navajo Nation as well.
And so, we throw that phrase around, but in actuality, sovereign immunity, we're speaking about people suing, outside people suing the Navajo Nation government. That's essentially what it means. And so when we talk about sovereignty in the context of the law that was read, do we have an idea of what we're talking about? I believe, and again, I agree with Dana, that this is a subjective understanding of what sovereign immunity means. To me, sovereign immunity means self-governance, ability to rule, a soft rule. And as far as early as 1600, 1700 United States, when they dealt with Indian nations, they talked about the inherent sovereign ability of Indian nations to rule themselves. Okay, so there was a big debate back in the 1600s about whether Indian nations have that attribute, and we say we do. And I think that's what folks are talking about when they say, I'm not going to waive sovereign immunity. So in this context, we're talking about the ability, the inherent attribute to rule and govern ourselves. What's at stake is our trust resources, or our resources. They're not trust. They're not called trust until the United States government exercises domain over them. But our resources are ours. They're there for us to manage the way we see fit. And this legislation touches on our ability to manage our resources that happens to be in trust status pursuant to federal and Indian relations. And so I believe that this legislation, because of that, I believe this legislation touches on the sovereign immunity of the Navajo Nation. And that's why I feel that this is a threat if we allow this to continue to drag down and be subjected to perhaps the United States pulling the offer that they want to share with us. So that's why I say that I view this as a threat to the sovereign immunity of the Navajo Nation. For that reason, I feel that this is an emergency that we need to take action on. Thank you. Go ahead.
Honorable Witherspoon?
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem and members of the Council. I wanted to ask essentially an opinion be provided, not essentially just a reading of essentially the code, so to speak, on the book and saying, okay, it's in your hands. I wanted an opinion from both attorneys to what is their opinion. Certainly we can go against their opinion, and I can read the same language that they read off as well. That's not what we pay them for. We pay them for an opinion to provide advice to the council. I don't feel the same threat, I guess, that maybe some of my other colleagues feel will occur by not entertaining this legislation today. I feel like there's certainly a need to follow our process that allows for information to be afforded to the public about a major agreement that's being brought forth regarding the United States and our resources. So I feel like a greater weight to provide, informed information. So I'd like to reserve my time and ask for the opinion of them as well, not just reading of the document. Thank you. Is there a time of 3 minutes, 25 seconds? Okay. Where's the Shepherd?
Thank you, Pro Tem. We're still accepting the agenda, and I think we're debating on the matter. So I think it just calls for a vote of put it on the agenda or not. And then if it is put on there, then I think we can go more into depth on all just debate back and forth. It's my recommendation. Thank you.
With that, any other, if you go back to Honorable, the motioning party, Mr. Sosi, to make your argument, and I'll call for the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem, and then other members of the council. Well, the one, the objection is premature. And as I agree with some other delegates, let's put it on the agenda, and if you feel that it's not properly on there, you can always vote no. And the other thing too is, whether it constitutes an emergency, we need to hear it out. And in fact, transparency was mentioned, and it's ironic it's mentioned, because by shutting it down, you're not being transparent. The whole world is watching today. So let's tell the whole world what it's about. That's transparency. But to try to shut it down before we even start the discussion, that's non-transparency. So let's not shut off the discussion on it, but rather allow the presentation to be done. And then, well, at that time, at the time of the presentation, I'm pretty sure evidence will come forth that if we do not act sooner, that there is going to be dollars lost and the possibility of the settlement being jeopardized. And so, yeah, we all have different definition of threats. And for me, I always feel threatened. You know, and I know my brother here to the left, you know, with his muscular body, you know, probably doesn't feel threatened. I was not referring to you, Delegate. I'm referring to my handsome brother, Delegate Witherspoon.
Did not hear you two kiss and made up, so it's not sorry.
No, we didn't. And moving on, Mr. Pro Tem. Again, you know, we are leaders. We've been voted in to act on behalf of Navajo people. And term limit is coming for some of us. That's the wishes of the Navajo people. And so some of us probably will not return. But the thing is we are going to be transparent to the Navajo people. We're going to discuss this openly today. And this is not an illegal process. We do have a process. It is the proper protocol to use emergency legislation to take care of an urgent need. And so that's why I respectfully ask my colleagues to vote in the affirmative, to vote green, and allow this, and let's discuss it. Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem.
Anyone see anybody else? Madam Chair.
Mr. Pro Tem, Chair and members of the, what are we in council or committee? Council. The urgency and emergency has not been clarified and justified to me, or to any of us, for that matter. Our sovereignty is not at stake. We don't have a fire going. We don't have a big flood going. No natural disaster happening. I'm knock on wood. But there's no emergency. And yesterday I posed a question to the attorneys that are working on this. And they said there is no emergency. So we need to follow our process. The process is drop it in the hopper, wait the regular 5 days, let people inform the people about it. If they wish to comment, they can comment. That's the process we're concerned with. Nihiko, like me, if I brought several legislation before this council, every time you would send me back and say, go do public hearings. All the time. And I do, I accommodate. I have joint meetings with various committees. So, I still follow the process. Everybody needs to follow the process. There is no emergency in this situation at all. I am talking about the agenda, whether we should add this item or not. My advocacy is that we don't add it. This started, well, I won't go there yet, but if we add it, I have more to say about it. But I don't believe we should add it. Hajob ina a ebik endi kha. Obor no na dan kito esh. Dan kisho eje aita. Bango hajob. There's nothing wrong with doing it the right way. And I believe that's all some of us are asking. We're not saying hide the information from the public. But giving them that 5 days is sharing the information with the public. And that's our policies and procedures. Please, let us respect that. In my comment, Mr. Chair.
With that, I'll go back to reserve time. Mr. Melgay, 3 minutes and 38 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem Chair, and again, my colleague here. This matter is a great landmark that this nation has encountered, and it's about to receive its praise. Therefore, it's important to take the proper process to appreciate the challenge that we have overcome the challenges and that we have an opportunity before us. So I think it's important to allow people to observe and absorb it as well. And so this is an opportune time. But if we position ourselves and position this effort in a crucial manner, then we're jeopardizing such an action, and that would be tragedy. Because this is not the council. This is the community and the nation's people that had made the effort from every angle and from every thoughts and prayers in the Navajo, and also appreciate the policies that we have in place that we're entrusted with. That's all I'm saying. And we will have an opportunity to forward our notice through the proper channel, and that is in the process right now. Let's unify it and let's all support it with one voice, with the unanimous vote. And we should not speak to the outside and people that are watching that we are divided in this type of a particular landmark action. So I think it's important to hold this off until the proper action is in place here. That's all we're saying here. Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem Chair. Thank you.
Legislative Council, do you have the response back to Honorable Witherspoon, not going to go to the next folks in line, and that's Mr. Begay, for your response to what?
Thank you. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, members of the council, in what Mr. Witherspoon was asking about what is a threat to sovereignty and what is an emergency, I understand that in reading the laws that's written and also what the Navajo Nation Court has advised on this particular situation, the one thing that is missing from both of those is at what point is that public record made? One side is the process that is under Section 164, that is the process for putting emergency legislation on the agenda. The court's interpretation of what is emergency legislation is another thing that we could look at. The issue that it comes down to is that is not addressed in either one of those is putting that on the agenda as we're doing now. One thing that we have to abide by in looking at what the court's interpretation is, as I said before, what is that public record that's being made to ensure that this is emergency legislation. I say that, and without having to go into executive session, the advice given to you as my client is that if there is a situation where this comes before the court, we want to make sure that you as our client are protected in the action that you take. And so the only thing that we can look toward right now is what the Navajo Supreme Court has said in Shirley v. Morgan about ensuring that the public record is made to determine what is emergency legislation. In listening to the debate on putting this on the agenda, that's the start of it. And as Ms. Bobroff and I have expressed to this council, that making the public record may be taken at the time the legislation is brought up before the council once it's put on the agenda. So all I'm saying right now is that the issue of putting it on the agenda is not addressing either situation. And so it'll be up to the council on how to make that determination of whether to put it on the agenda now and make the public record when it comes up at that point. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem.
Honorable Witherspoon, reserve time.
I have to convey a point of concern is that once it gets on the agenda, essentially our colleagues who are in support of such, it was unanimous yesterday, are essentially forced to vote in favor as well. So the question about, creating the record of it meeting an emergency needs to occur now. And so all of my colleagues that are interested in trying to advocate for it to be considered an emergency need to state such and create that record now. But for those that are not of the opinion that this doesn't meet the emergency threat, that putting it on the agenda needs to essentially not occur, because once it is on the agenda, then we will be voting. Our concern is certainly is provide the opportunity for all of the people we represent the opportunity to provide and get informed. I support certainly the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that's certainly has to do with free, prior, and informed consent. And what we're saying is that, our people are not going to be informed, even though it's on the website right now. What about all the people that are not on the website? I was looking in my email to see if the news, article about this issue was available, the updated one, to be able to send out to my constituents, and I don't see that. So I don't know that went out. Certainly not, I don't see on my email, so I don't know that any of my constituents are really informed. And certainly for them to provide comments, I value transparency and accountability, And I believe because of the great landmark accomplishment, and we all being unanimous, that our public has the right to be informed as well. And I don't see the threat, or don't feel the threat that my colleagues do, that by waiting for the 5-day comment period, somehow, some way, it's going to be lost. I just don't have that same kind of feel and of fear, I guess, of letting the public know. I don't understand that concern. So the other part of my concern was I also wanted the Department of Justice to go on record and have their opinion as well. Because that's part of essentially the record that we're trying to establish. And so I want Department of Justice opinion as well. And I reserve my time.
Dana?
Thank you. And I'm going to start speaking, and I don't want to remind me to give the opportunity to the Attorney General if he has some addition to add. I can understand the frustration that you're having right now as to the question of whether this is a threat to the nation's sovereignty and whether it's an emergency. As your new legislative council talked about, right now, there is not many places that the attorneys can look to tell you what the established law is on the emergency legislation. There is only what's in the code, and there has been only one slight reference in a Supreme Court case. So we've got a vacuum of law right now. So what we're trying to do is put forth to you what the status of the law is, and tell you, and Levon and I are still in agreement, this is a subjective decision for the council. To assist you in making the decision, I think one thing that is, as Delegate Witherspoon pointed out, what is, as you're going to use it in this situation, what is sovereignty? Okay? We are not talking about a waiver of sovereign immunity. There is no waiver of sovereign immunity in this legislation. We are talking about sovereignty. If you look in a Black's Law Dictionary, which is a tool lawyers use all the time, sovereignty talks about how a government governs its people and its land. Okay? There is very little in the Supreme Court cases to discuss that. There's very little in your code to talk about what that means in the Navajo context. So, as it says in Title II, you are the governing body of the council. You have a responsibility right now to start to define what sovereignty means in your context. The next thing that is missing, which is also problematic, is that there is no definition of when you say emergency. What do you mean exactly by emergency? Does the emergency have to be today, tomorrow? What's the time frame? No definition. One of the problems that is that a lot of, because this is settlement of litigation, there is a lot of attorney-client information that needs to be shared to have a full round discussion on whether there is a threat to sovereignty. Let's keep in mind, I'm trying to think of what I can disclose. I'm not going to ask you to go into executive session, but I'm going to put some things out for you to consider. One, because it's litigation, and let's keep in mind that it was litigation that the prior council authorized the Navajo Attorney General to file against the United States. This is not defensive litigation. The Navajo Nation sued the United States. And they sued the United States in federal court. When they did that, they agreed to follow the rules of the court. That court put forth a confidentiality and protective order. We have to make sure that we honor that. So these are some of the discussions that can be had to make this decision, and it's not a decision that Legislative Council or myself can point to and say, on page 6, it's defined here for you, or on this court decision, it's defined. That is a discussion you need to have. I happen to agree with Mr. Henry that the best place to develop that record is when you're debating the legislation. So I'm going to turn to the Attorney General, see if he cares to add anything.
I think you've answered the question, thank you. Is that a vote to Honorable Russ Begay's next in line?
Okay, last speaker pro tem do bespas anda ni kliniki dan hinga fsagi di ea le Washington kides in no BIA Department of Interior US government akon kha yalo beson kha le lato itashi kha le ja ne do ego ila do ego o do asabahat zango beson ha na ja aro natural resources at todo show kidades ego binina inal sos beni sos a Navajo Nation heat kodo beni so kodo task force in the 22nd Navajo Nation Council but he jedo ganasti late ako aleya kon you cheje Likanski hotza 554 million the largest settlement of any tribe in the history of this country. We're talking about taking this money that we work hard through court and through our attorneys to secure. Speaker
Mr. Begay, we're only debating whether this item needs to go on the agenda or not, so just keep to that as to whether or not you're in favor or not.
Right. Ako the Navajo Nation attorney, the Attorney General of Nipasala. Ako kodo thank you.
Reserve time. As long as you get that reserve time of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Mr. Nez, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, members of the council, audience, the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web. I think the cat is out of the bag. So, and one of the things I wanted to say is, pursuant to Title II, Section 221, it states that once you sign it, Mr. Speaker, any legislation, the Speaker of the Navajo Nation Council, Speaker Pro Tem, shall certify the adoption of any resolution of the Navajo Nation Council by signing the same after it is engrossed by the Director of Legislative Services. Adopted resolution shall be filed with Central Records Department. I don't see the exhibit marked confidential. This is public record. Someone could go down to Central Records right now and get a copy of this document. The cat is out of the bag. Those of you that want to wait and go through the process, we might be jeopardizing our relationship or whatever we're agreeing to. I think we have no choice but to consider this today. Because under 225, it also states that access to contracts or papers shall be provided to the public by the Central Records Department as provided in the Navajo Privacy and Access to Information Act. It's public record. So either we deal with it now, or this is going to be out there and we might jeopardize whatever we're all agreeing to. I think we just put ourselves in a bind. We do have to consider this today. There's no way around this. So with the introduction of this legislation, it became public record. So I think we need to be able to vote green. Put it on the agenda. Let's get this process moving along. Because again, we're jeopardizing what we're all agreeing to. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, members of the council. Thank you.
I do have some reserved time and one more individual you want to go to the board. Call it a day on this. Is there consensus to vote on this right now? Okay, go to the board vote. Only adding it to the agenda. Curley? What kind of votes? Good. Mr. Cheeto? Voting. Which way you going, Mr. Cheeto? Okay, by vote, vote well, in favor, 5 opposed, amendment 3 passes.